We welcome now our political panel. Mally Smith, a Democratic strategist and former political director for the Harris campaign in North Carolina, and John Thomas, Republican political strategist and managing director at Nestpoint. Gentlemen, great to have you both. Mally, I'd like to start with you. So Senate Democrats, they wanted the White House to unfreeze federal funding to pass this small batch of the president's more non-confrontational, you could say, nominees. The president calling that proposed deal political extortion. And this is reportedly the first time in history, we should note, that not a single nominee who made it out of committee, including some with bipartisan votes, got a unanimous consent vote. So how do you see this playing out for the left, namely Schumer?
Well, we know that previously Schumer got a lot of criticism from progressives and those on the left for not pushing back hard enough on the Trump administration. So I think he is recalibrating his response to try to, put more pressure on the Trump administration and to show the Democratic base that he is fighting back. I think this is a fair request because simply they're asking for the Trump administration to spend money on agencies that have already had this money allocated to them. And also, too, it's just how the Senate works, right? The House is a simple majority vote, but with the Senate, it requires, 60 votes to get a lot of what you need done. And Trump needs to show that he's actually a deal maker and work with Senate Democrats to come up with a deal to advance his nominees.
Well, to that point, John, Senate Majority Leader John Thune, he called this historic and unprecedented obstruction. Do you think the call to send lawmakers home was the right one?
Well, yeah, because there clearly wasn't any movement on this, and he's not going to keep his members just sitting forever. Look, I think this is really disappointing, and President Trump is right. It is essentially attempted extortion to get something else from the president that has nothing to do with these nominees. But this actually has been going on since President Trump got elected. It's taken historically longer for him to get his nominees, some controversial, most not, to get confirmed. And it's really part of a larger play, which is the Democrats want to stop President Trump from driving his agenda. And part of that is give him the people in place that he needs to drive his agenda. It slows down the efficiency of government and it thwarts President Trump's agenda. That's what's really going on here.
So, John, one quick follow up, and then I'd like to hit another topic as well. Republicans now say they might consider changing Senate rules to speed up the pace of confirmations. What are your thoughts on the precedent that move of, quote unquote, going nuclear may set now?
Yeah, I think that'd be a big mistake. Both Republicans and Democrats have talked about this for years. The balance of power ebbs and flows, and we don't want to go and change a rule that would work against the other side when they're not in power. I think the proper course here is for President Trump and the Republicans to take to the media and directly to their constituents to explain what's going on. And that will in turn apply pressure to Democrats to get enough votes. It's uncomfortable, it's slow and clunky, but that's better than the alternative of creating a precedent that would allow the Democrats, when they're in power, to not have to work at all with the Republicans.
Well, that was the direction of the president in his social media post. So we'll see. Mally, I wanted to ask you also, this is all unfolding as another former Biden aide is set to be in the hot seat this week, Anita Dunn. And she's, of course, the former senior advisor to the president for communications under the Biden administration. So she is scheduled for a deposition before the House Oversight Committee on Thursday. And that, of course, is the committee that's been leading this investigation into President Biden's mental fitness and this alleged cover-up of his cognitive decline. So what are they hoping to learn from Dunn specifically? And also, what do you think generally we've heard so far from aides who have actually answered some of these questions?
Yeah, I think Anita Dunn should answer the questions truthfully because I don't think there's any cover up that they're hiding. Biden aged like everyone does, but he was cognitively fine. He was a great leader and a great president. The real question is, why are House Republicans focusing on this at the moment? And there are two reasons. First, they don't want to talk about Trump's terrible economic bill, which cuts taxes for millionaires and billionaires and takes away health care from 10 million Americans. It also adds $3 trillion to the debt, all to pay for these tax cuts for the very rich. And then the second reason they were talking about this is, despite, exercising their oversight muscles, they don't seem to care to get to the bottom of the Epstein files, something they have spent a ton of time promoting. And House Republicans are really, providing cover for President Trump because he is a friend and close associate with the sex offender Epstein. And we know that Pam Bondi has told him that he is in the files. So this is why they're focusing on that. They don't want to actually provide any oversight to the Trump administration. Well,
John, I will give you a moment to comment on that criticism of all of this being a distraction from the Epstein files. But let me ask you this first. There have been people close with the president or close to him who say, President Biden, former president, that yes, he wasn't as sharp as in earlier years, but he could still do the job. I think the question here becomes, what's the threshold? What actions cross the line as qualifying as a purposeful cover-up, and what consequences do you believe will be pursued as a result of any such findings?
Yeah, that's right, Kelly. It's important going forward for future administrations to understand what conduct at a staff level, what conduct is appropriate and not, what constitutes a cover-up. That's important. And then, of course, there are important legal questions, such as if the auto pen that we know under Biden did so many of these pardons, are those pardons effective if the president was never aware of them? That's important. And then, of course, the other critical thing here is we know from Jake Tapper's reporting, the Wall Street Journals, and others, that the staff covered up for the president's drastic decline. We know that Jake Tapper's reported that the president, Biden, didn't recognize his national security advisor, didn't recognize George Clooney, that the staff had very limited hours and exposure for the press so that they couldn't answer questions. It was a consistent cover-up so that the media and the American people didn't know to the extent of the decline. The decline was so great that the Democratic Party forced a president out of the running for re-election. Okay, that's how bad this was.
Well,
but I think the biggest point...
I'm sorry, John, I don't mean to cut you off. We're up against the clock here. I just want to address also this argument of this being a distraction, because we've heard this time and time again. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, the fact that, this is swirling in the background, this is something that so many Republicans were so vehemently pursuing. Now the president's in office and we have no answers.
Well, government can do two things at once. The Republicans have been talking about the auto pen and Biden's decline before the election, and they said they'd get to the bottom of it. So I expect both of those things to happen. The biggest question is, Kelly, a lot of these staffers, Anita Dunn and other, they're not done with government. If they go into future administrations, the American people need to either have them held accountable, or the American people need to know what they did so that American people can make their choice in upcoming elections of whether or not they want to reward a Democrat who will hire Anita Dunn, for instance. This is important not just for looking in the rearview mirror, but also going forward into future elections.
All right, John Thomas, Mally Smith, great to have you both. We have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, meanwhile, an independent watchdog agency is launching an investigation